hear Tracy's story. Tracy, what's your story?
Oh my.
Start
Oh
with your
boy.
swimming background if you want. You need some prompts.
Sure, sure. I swam as a kid. I swam like what would it be like September to May. I'm the opposite of some people, I guess. Our neighbor was a lifeguard and a USMS official, school teacher, and I don't know. One day she told my mother, "Oh, I'll take Tracy to the pool that I lifeguard at over the summer with me and run her through the Red Cross classes." And by the time I finished all of those, and I think even then I loved being in the pool, but by the time I finished all of those, she told my mother, "Oh, here's the swim team you should put her on." And I was 7 or 8, and so I did that, and I swam age group. I did age group and was never. I was always middle of the road. Probably should have realized when the 25 no breath was like almost an impossibility for me for months and months and months that I was asthmatic, but my husband caught that I was asthmatic when I was in my 20s.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, but I guess swimming is a classic thing for asthmatics to take up. A lot of us have a lot of luck doing it. So, yeah, I swam when I was a kid for until I was about 12, and then I stopped when I encountered when the mean girl on the team happened to also have the family that sort of ran the team, and she and I were in the same age group in too many of the same events, and it became unpleasant. I went to a small enough high school that we didn't have a team, so I didn't swim then, and I went to a small enough college that we did have a team, and it was low key enough that I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll swim in college, sure."
Cool.
I've swum masters with what was Indy Swim Fit and became Indy Aquatic Masters since I was in my mid to late 20s. I started maybe a year or two after I moved to Indianapolis. And there I swim with people who swam like, Division I college. So usually when college swimming comes up, I just sort of sidestep it. I'm not like, "Oh yeah, I swam in college." I'm like, dude, I swam in college where one a day practices were just fine. So I've always, I mean, I guess I've always been a swimmer, but never been like and never been I've never been an outstanding swimmer. I always thought I was just middle of the road, and that was fine. I did IM and breaststroke always when I was a kid and when I was in college. So, and I was just thinking the other day that I remember a set when I was in college where you were supposed to do, your first stroke, your fourth stroke, your second, your third. And I was like, wait a minute. Back then it was breaststroke. Freestyle would have been my last stroke. Like the thing that you're just not good at. And then so it would be breast fly back free. And I'm like, wow, that's changed. Okay.
How often do you do an IM nowadays?
Oh, only with Zoomers on, and only if I'm feeling ambitious at practice. My butterfly has something a little messed up, and my backstroke just feels terminal. I don't know. I'd love to be able to do it to swim under bridges and things like that. I'm like, oh, it's proficient enough for that. I can't figure out. I'm like, it's just freestyle, flipped the other way. I'm like, so why can't I get this to work out? And I think the butterfly, I think if I did it more at practices, and I've got this pause at the front of the stroke where I get a wiggle with my hands, like a little bit of a skull or something that isn't good. And I keep thinking, oh, I'll straighten that out. And then I'm like, oh, no, evidently I'll do sets of 500 free instead. Okay.
There you go. Yeah. So when did you start swimming marathons?
I didn't start swimming marathons for a long time. Around here, Big Shoulders up in Chicago is like or at least in my mind, I was like, oh my God, that's like the longest thing I can ever think of swimming, right? And I'm thinking the first year I had always had in the back of my mind, like, oh, someday that would be fun to do. And I also had like a wake up call between reading Lynn Cox's Swimming to Antarctica, where she talks about her age group swimming days and how she was never quite making the intervals, but she could like basically, take 3 seconds and go again. And her husband or her coach was like, "You're running yourself ragged. What are you doing?" I'm like, well, that's me at swim practices. I wonder if there's any kind of commonality there between that and having a 1 hour USMS where I looked at my results one year and somebody who wasn't normally in my age group, we were side by side. And I was like, what? This person kicks me around on 100s. Like, we're not swimming in the same lane. There's nothing. And I just, a light bulb in my head went off like, oh, they can't like set a pace that's like a few seconds slower than what they would normally swim at and just do that for an hour. Like, I guess I'd always assumed they could do 104s for an hour, no problem. Evidently, she couldn't. So I was like, oh, maybe it's not that I'm not really fast. Maybe it's that I'm a distance swimmer. And at that point I was like, okay, I should try Big Shoulders. And the first year that it looked like everything was going to fall into place, I found out that I was pregnant with my son. And I was like, okay, maybe not Big Shoulders. And let's see, he was born in 2005, and I did not get around to signing up for Big Shoulders until 2015, the first year that it ever got canceled.
Oh man.
I was like trained and, had really found out that the distance workouts were my thing and that I could swim more. And if I just didn't do quite as many sprint workouts, I was in much better shape. And so 2016, I actually did Big Shoulders. And then I came out of it and I was like, wow, I think that Big Shoulders is a 5K. It's two loops of a 5K in Lake Michigan. And it starts right from downtown Chicago, from the Ohio Street Beach. And it's like one of those really iconic swims, but it's gotten very big and very, very populated by triathletes in wetsuits. And I don't know. And I think it was sort of on the cusp of changing a little the first year that I did it. I haven't done it since, but it's a fun, neat swim. So I came back and I went, I think that I might like this. And what did I do? I found my teammate, Mark Spratt. I said, hey, I think I like this. What should I do next? And I was like, and he's like, oh, well, you could look at this, you could look at that. And I think everything he was sort of pulling up was around a 10K. And I said, well, our family vacation next year, we're going to be out in the Pacific Northwest for 3 weeks. We're going to be in Portland at the time of the Portland Bridge Swim. What about that? And he said, oh, yeah, sure, you could do that. So I signed up for the Portland Bridge Swim. And then a week later realized that the longest distance I'd ever swum was 5K, and I really needed a plan.
Because the Portland Bridge Swim's like 17K,
17,
right?
Yeah.
It's a little jump.
Yeah, and that first one, that Portland Bridge Swim, boy, that last 5K was definitely tough. I mean, not like, oh, I can't finish this, but like, oh God, this hurts. What was I thinking?
the end of the Portland Bridge Swim, just for if you guys haven't done it yet, you pass all the bridges in downtown Portland and it's awesome. And then it's like the last 5 miles of 11 that there you can see the finish because it's a straight shot to the St. John Bridge, but
Right.
it
It's
never
a
comes
very,
up.
very tall bridge.
It's a very tall bridge.
It's
It's very big.
best
You
to
can
not
see it,
look at it because
but
it
it
seems
takes
like it's
you
right
hours
there.
to get there. So it's
Yeah.
torturous.
Yeah.
But
They,
anyway.
they should have a half Portland Bridge Swim.
I think it's called a relay.
They're really iconic. I mean, it's fantastic. And of course, like I did swim the suck later in the same year. I hadn't signed up for it, but I managed to slip in. Like I was trained, and somehow we were talking about it. I was like, oh well, yeah. If there was ever going to be a year that I was trained and could just fall right into that. And Mark again was like, well, just email Kara and see if any, because he's like, people drop out, you might be able to slip in. And I did. And I remember like the second really long one was Swim the Suck. And I was like, oh, well, this is really nice. It's really green and rolling. It all looks the same. I was like, wow, the Portland Bridge Swim where you can like check off the bridges and you know that you're making progress.
Yeah.
I did not realize how nice and how kind of unusual that is to have those sort of landmarks. I think Swim the Suck. I mean, it is gorgeous, but the scenery is much more uniform throughout.
Uniform scenery. Yeah, it's a new metric of marathon swimming. How uniform is the scenery?
I got a funny feeling channel swimmers probably say the same thing. Uniform scenery.
There's a reason why the bridge swims are advertised as bridge swims, so you can check them off.
Right. It's like one of those things, when that's your first one, like I didn't realize until later that like mentally being able to figure out where on the course I was and say, okay, well, I've got that under my belt, like, that's something that I had done, and that is not something that's available in some of these other swims.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, most of them. I mean, you I guess you can ask your kayaker, but a lot of these things you don't know until you get close to the end that's where you are.
Right. Yeah. So your mom, you find yourself a marathon swimmer. Why do you keep doing it?
I always say, so my kids are a little bit older now. I've got a 15-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. And I said that I took it up because, nobody says mom when you're doing these long workouts. Like, you're in the water. There's no mom, where are my socks? Where's this? Oh my God, that. It just I love sort of the meditative quality about it. But that being said, like I can't imagine trying to do it when the kids were really young. I guess my daughter was fairly young when I started training for big shoulders. And then by the time I had that second season, I'm trying to think, she would have been 6, so old enough that I could let my husband run the show when I'm doing the training on the weekends. And for the events, by and large, I mean, there are a few of them that the family has come to because they've, the Portland Bridge Swim, because it was in the middle of our vacation. But I think by and large, it's kind of something I go off and do on my own. But my daughter, we spent a year out in Portland a couple years ago, and I got my daughter into a kayaking summer camp, and she came home saying, okay, I'll kayak, I'm going to go kayak this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other thing. And I was like, oh, will you kayak for me on my big swims when when they say you're old enough to do it? She's like, oh yeah, I will. I'm definitely holding her to that.
Yeah.
She might just do it. My son, I think it would take a lot of cold hard cash, and he still would be feeding me and saying, gosh, this is really long.
Right, right.
He's a little stoic, so he might not complain too much, but I'm not sure he'd be into it.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems it's a hard sell for you.
Yeah, I
There's some
don't
people that
know.
love it and some that don't, but it's
Yeah,
okay.
and neither of my kids are swimmers. I didn't. My son tried it for half a year when he was little, and I still remember he was like, "Mom, I'm always the tardiest swimmer." He was like 7 or 8, and because he just joined the team, he was the last one coming in on everything, and I don't know. It beats some energy out of him, and he'll still swim, but he's not interested in being on swim team, and
He's got the
and
rest of
that's
his life
fine.
ahead of him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He
I'm
knows how
kind
to
of like,
swim.
having to juggle my swim schedule and their swim schedule,
That would be
and
torturous.
and all the early mornings. I'm like, yeah, if it's not driven by them, I'm not gonna push it. And I'm the only swimmer in the family. I don't come from a swimming family where it's something that you do.
Yeah. So tell me what it's like when you finish a marathon swim. How does it feel?
Oh my God. Usually I just feel tired and hungry. I think I'm like, I almost every single one, I'm like, oh wow, that took a lot. Am I sure about this? Most recently this summer, Steve Grunwald and I did a tandem of a width of Tahoe, not the length. The length is the really long one, just a nice width, and we just sort of slipped on the schedule. It was not something that I had planned for this year. All of the swims that I had planned for this swim season got canceled, but Steve and I were texting, and he said, do you have anything on the schedule? And I was like, no, it's all cleared off. And I was like, and I'm really not trained for anything more than 10 miles. I've been able to get in local lakes and do this, do that, and have some schizophrenic, why am I bothering to do any of this? Who knows? And then the days where I'm like, oh, let's go really long and, get in a good long training swim. So we did Tahoe, and at the end of Tahoe, I remember like finally feeling like, oh, okay, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad it's not longer. And check, I'm hungry. Check, I'm tired. But hey, I kind of feel like maybe I could have gone longer. That's interesting. This being the 1 year that I really wasn't specifically training.
Yeah.
But it may also just be the 1 year that 12 miles is really within my comfort zone, instead of the swims that I take on continuing to be a reach. Who knows?
Yeah. Can you tell us about the swim you're most proud of?
Most proud of. Yeah. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I guess I'll say this. I think it was May this spring. A couple of people that I swim with for Indy were trying to requalify for their English Channel swims because it didn't look like it was going to go this year, and their 6 hour 60 degree or below swim qualification was going to expire. And so I got in, I committed to the first 2 hours, like on paper, I organized it. I was like, oh, I'll organize it, sure. And my friend Mike Dolans was like, oh yeah, you could do this, you could do this. And I kept hedging, like, yeah, okay, we'll see. I'll throw on sunscreen and I'll bring enough feeds that if I keep going, then I keep going. But on paper, I was committed to 2 hours. And I did end up staying in the full 6. And I will also say that it was like the water, when we started, it might have been 58 or 59. And certainly it's kind of a series of 3 lakes connected by a couple of channels, and the whole thing is like, 2 miles if you swim all 3 lakes. So we're talking very small lakes. The second and the third ones are a little cooler than the largest one that we have a friend that lives on. So I think it was right around 60 there. So it's a little cooler in the other two. But we had an amazing day. It was probably 70-degree air temp by the time we finished. We started in the morning, and the water might have been 60 in all 3 lakes by the very end of the swim. So I'm like, this was not, water 57 degrees, air temp in the 40s, or
Yeah.
It was strategically chosen.
Yeah. But you did it. I was hoping you were going to say that one. To set your mind to 2 hours and go out and do 6. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I think again, I actually think that that not being committed made it easier.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, like I said, it wasn't like I had to, scrape together and figure out, like, at 2 hours, I was like, oh, I want to keep going. I was like, yeah, this feels okay. I'll keep going. And I've got feeds for it. So it wasn't totally, but I also, right. If I'd wanted to get out at 2 hours, I would have been like, well, okay, I'm getting out. This is what I signed up for. Do they have marathon swims like that?
I'll never forget.
You commit to 10 miles, but you go 50 if
right. If you just can keep going. There's something about that getting started. I think I remember the year I did Northeast Kingdom Week up, in Vermont with Phil when my son Rowan was like 8 months old. but I remember I wasn't ready for it specifically, but I remember going into Massawippi, which is like 9 miles, and telling Phil at the beginning, I was like, I'm really tired. My shoulder really hurts. I don't know if I'm going to make it today. And he's like, why don't you just get started? And, he's like, if you need to get out, we'll pull you out. but I swam the whole thing,
Right.
Like there's that.
Right.
It's good to get started.
I think it is, and not having that pressure in your head, but just being. And I mean, I think this is also the way I get through most marathon swims. It's marathon swimming and labor. It's the same thing. Okay, what about the next 15 minutes? Not can you make the whole thing? Let's, can you stick in there for 15 more minutes? Yeah, sure. Let's take 15 minutes. Or in the case of marathon swimming, I guess it's usually the feeds. Like, can you go to the next feed? So when the mind starts saying, oh God, this is long, I don't know, that shoulder hurts. Oh my God. You don't say, oh, I'm only a mile in and I've got 10 miles left. What on earth am I thinking? You say, well, let's take it to the next feed and see what happens. And I think when you don't have your mind undoing you with, in my case, because I learned fractions about the same time I started swimming. And so I always would do fractions in my head when we were doing sets. Okay, we're 2/3 of the way through this set, and this set is 3/4 of the way through the swim practice. So in long swims, it's, oh my God, you're only, 10% into this swim and you're already having these thoughts. What are you thinking? I find that if you can get your head out of that mindset, you're much, much better off. And usually I think getting started the first, somewhere between the first 10%, first quarter of the swim can be tough to kind of settle into the mindset. And then I always find, I compare it to the third 25 of the 100 or the third 50 of the 200. The last quarter, you can push yourself through by knowing that you're at the end and that, it's going to finish. But man, that 50% to 75% is where my mind, it gets long, it gets hard. And how do you find the push there? I'd say that those are the tough spaces, are usually in the beginning. And then once I'm kind of past the halfway point, but the end is nowhere in sight, those are where I really start piecing it out and saying, okay, 15 more minutes, 300 more strokes, the
Mhm.
next feed, whatever it is. Don't think about how much further out you have. Let's just take this little by little and see if we get there.
Mhm.
And I guess if you don't, you don't.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're making me think of all these things about how like set distance, not having swam, and I think that people are swimming channels and in currents where you don't know how long it's going to be. You can't piece it out like that, so that's when like the fractions can betray you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I always, anytime I read about like a channel swim where they get right in there and then encounter the current or the tide or whatever and end up going for another 3-4 hours, I'm like, oh my God, that's got to mess with you, something fierce. And I was like, how, I'm just like, how do you train for that? How do you,
Gotta let it go, I guess.
yeah, how do you dig in when you can see the land, but you can't get there because you're just stuck in something? I'm like, man, those people, they got to be pulling it. I don't know where they're pulling it from then. And I was like, could I do that? Well, one day maybe I'll find out, because
Right.
I assume sooner or later I'll find myself in a situation like that where towards the end of the swim, towards what I think is the end of the swim, something that's out of my control is going to make it hugely long. And yeah, I'll figure it out. But I'm always very admiring when I read those accounts of swims.
You seem to me like the reluctant marathon swimmer. Like you just stumbled into it and you're like, I guess I'll keep doing this.
I Yeah, I'm funny. I have a bumper sticker on my car that I picked up at a surf shop on the Oregon coast. It says, "That's a horrible idea. What time?" And like every marathon swimmer that sees my car, that's the bumper sticker that they're like, "Oh, I love that one." I'm like, "Oh my God, that is evidently the tell of a marathon swimmer." But I think it is especially apt for me. I'm like, okay, just logically speaking, I can tell you, everything about this that's going to make it hard or going to make it, here's a pitfall, there's a pitfall, whatever. And I think maybe not so much to be negative, but or not so much focused on the negative, but just like, I don't know, and I'm not sure I really want to commit to doing these things before I'm really sure that I can. And that being said, marathon swimming always has that element of things that are completely out of your control, like the wind, the weather, the currents, whatever. I always figure you go out for a swim, you put in the best training that you can, you try to put yourself there mentally, and there's a piece of it that's just completely out of your control. And if you can't complete it, you can't hold yourself accountable for completing it. You hold yourself accountable for the effort. You hold yourself accountable for trying to have the right mindset, trying to be prepared enough when you get there. I don't know. I never feel like I'm prepared enough when I get there. I always feel like my mindset could have been a little bit better. But there are those things that it doesn't matter. You could have been more prepared. You could have had the perfect mindset, and there are events that you're still not going to complete because something that is out of your control, pardon me, something that is out of your control happened. And that's part of all this, because you're not just in a pool doing laps.
It's true. It's super true. Yeah. So is there anything you brought to my mind? Is there anything that you haven't finished?
you know I don't think so. Not in marathon swimming. There was a 2 mile cable swim. It was a local event. I don't, because it was a cable swim, it might have been the national event or whatever. This was just as I was getting into marathon swimming, I think. And I remember I showed up for it. I had a lot of stuff going on with work. I was just really anxious about what was going on in the rest of my life. And I got into the water and I did one loop of it. So I did half mile. And I just was like, I don't feel right. I feel really jittery. I can't figure out. I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't feel very safe for me to be in the water. And I'm getting out because something doesn't feel right about this. And so I did. And then I came home and my husband was like, did you take the coffee before it finished brewing this morning? And I was like, yeah, I guess I did. I had to run. I had to, get out the door to get to this event. And he's like, yeah, because my coffee was really, really weak. I was like, oh, I had an extra dose of caffeine to go with all that anxiety. Maybe I wasn't having a panic attack in the water. But that's the only thing right now that I can think of that I haven't finished in open water swimming. I'm sure that there's one on the horizon, and I don't know. I don't want to be I don't want to be somebody who's like, well, if I sign up for an event, obviously I'm going to finish it, period, the end. No other option is available, because as I said, I think that there are just too many situations where safety is at issue, or it doesn't matter. They can let you swim in place for hours and hours and hours, but if you can't make headway, that keeping you in the water is not going to work. So I'd like to think that when I hit that, or there are the days that you get out there and your body tells you, sorry, we're not here. That's not possible. But it hasn't happened to me yet on a long event. I've got about a dozen 10K pluses under my belt, not much more than that. So it's it's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. And I like to think that I'll be graceful about it, but I did, in conjunction with the 24-hour relay, I did an Alcatraz swim in February a couple of years ago. And I guess the current was much stronger than we had predicted. And we were coming in too slowly. There were 4 of us, 2 got pulled, and then it was Steve Grunwald and I. And we hit this current, and man, we were getting ready to be swept out past the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, we needed to get in, and we're fighting the current. And I am, I don't kick. I'm kicking as hard as I can. I'm sprinting. I feel like I'm staying in place. But every time I breathe to the left, I can see that Steve is doing the same thing. So I'm like, okay, we'll just do it. And I think I would have told you, oh yeah, if they have to pull you from a swim, it's a safety consideration. You just listen to the pilot or the observer. It's out of your hands. I'm in the water and I'm swimming as fast as I can, and I'm every breath I'm like, they are not pulling me out of this water. And I still think that if Sylvia had said, hey, it's time, we can't safely do this anymore, I would have I hope I would have immediately flipped to, okay, that's the signal, that's that, it's out of my hands. But I was really surprised that instead of being like, oh, we might not be able to make this, I was like, I'm making it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was wondering, has your asthma ever bothered you when you're swimming marathons?
It has never. I always bring an inhaler with me. I usually try to take one a hit at the start. but yeah, and I think for Swim the Suck, I later realized that I had a little bit of a cold or something. I think I had some background going on that morning, and I knew when I got in the water, or before then, and I told my kayaker that morning, I was like, something's off. I think I might be getting sick or something. I was like, I'm just going to take this really easy, but I may, here's my inhaler. If I need it, it's probably time for me to get out because I know that I'm a little bit under today anyhow. No, it's never bothered me. I always figure that if it does, it would probably be an allergic reaction to something in the water. But I think maybe the systemic or the systematic breathing helps. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I remember when I used to coach swimming a long time ago, I had a little summer club I coached, and I remember there was a couple kids that were asthmatic that were like, "Oh, our doctor told us we need to swim."
Yeah, I've done some reading, and I don't think that they really, like, that pulmonologists really understand, but swimming seems to work very well for asthmatics as long as you don't have a heavy duty reaction to pool chemicals, assuming you're a pool swimmer or, oh my God, being a lake swimmer. Yeah, there are times of the year when there are definitely things in the lake that I'm, having allergies to, and that'll bump up the asthma. But it's never happened while I'm swimming. So
Good. How's the pandemic been for you? I haven't really checked in with you since the virtual swim practice days.
Yeah, I've been having a wonderful pandemic. How about you? No, this year, so the first year, or the year that I went out to Portland, I had thought that the next thing on my list for marathon swimming was SCAR. I was like, I want to bump up and do the whole SCAR swim. And I got out to Portland, and I couldn't find a team to practice with regularly enough. I couldn't, like, there just so much of my life was in flux that I finally, at some point, like probably about now, when it was time to register for SCAR, I said, you know what, I'm not going to take it on this year. I think it would just send my stress sky high, and I just don't feel like I know what the plan is for training for it. So how does this relate to the pandemic? I was supposed to do SCAR this summer, and it totally got wiped off the schedule. And I was really bummed because February, I really felt like my training, I was going longer and further than I ever had before. I felt like my long distance training was falling into place. So that was really hard. But I think having the year in Portland where I didn't really have that big event that I was training for, and I didn't really know what I was doing with my marathon swimming. What I ended up doing there was swimming down the thermometer, getting cold water adapted, or at least starting that process. I ended up getting in a bunch of ocean swims. I had never, well, not never. I guess I'd done the Lido Key swim. That was my first ocean swim, and it was right before I went out to Portland. But I had not yet established any comfort with ocean swimming, and I got in a lot of ocean swimming while I was on the West Coast. Cold water swimming, what else? Night swimming, like all of these things that I think I hadn't pieced together that they're part of if you want to take on some of the big marathon swims or create one of your own or whatever. All of these things are pieces of that. And in fact, like the cold water swimming and the night swimming are both pieces in SCAR that I really didn't have the experience for them. And I was like, okay, so I totally let the distance go, but I added in these other things that have been of immense benefit. So I'm kind of trying to look at pandemic world the same way. I'm like, okay, all my events got wiped. And what have I gotten? I got the Tahoe swim, which was just amazing. I'm having a really hard time as we head into the winter. I struggle through winters normally anyhow. I would gladly go into a semi-hibernative state, and just as soon as work agrees to give me a paycheck and let me not come, that's what
Let
I'll
me
be
know.
doing
I
for
get
the
that
winter.
agreement.
So, I the whole time we were in the spring when it was pandemic world, I kept focusing on like, oh, I'm so glad that this is happening in the spring because it's spring and life is coming up and we'll have access to the lakes soon, and there are all these good things on the horizon. It would be so hard if this was happening, as we were heading into winter. And I woke up the other day and went, oh crap, that's where we are. So
Mhm.
I'm just thankful we have some pools that I have access to. It is not my normal master's practice access schedule. The amount of time I can get in at pools is more limited than it used to be. But I'm thankful that we have some access, and I'm trying to focus on that. I'm trying to sort of figure out what pieces of marathon swimming maybe I haven't thought about before that I might be able to work on in a pandemic. My guess is, like Oregon, it'll slap me in the face that I've worked on some pieces of it after all is said and done.
How
It's
about
probably not going to be systematically like, okay, I'm going to work on nutrition right now. Here's my 8-week plan, because all of those 8-week plans seem to be going straight to hell.
How about slogging through? That's what you're working on during the pandemic, is just slogging through,
That might be,
getting to
that
the
might
other
be,
side.
that's right. Letting go of what's out of your control and
Yep.
trying to focus on what you can control, which is evidently so much less than you ever thought it was.
Yep.
I used to think that going to swim practice was totally within my control. Not if
Right.
that swim practice doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're all slogging through, but we can do it. We're marathon swimmers.
I found a lot of joy in swimming this year that I'm not sure. I mean, maybe it would have been there in a non-pandemic world, but there have just been times when, just being at the lake and having nothing to train for, I'm like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. And it's a gorgeous, early summer day. And I'm so happy to be here. And it's nice not to have in the back of my head, okay, I've got to do 6K today.
Yeah.
And maybe I still end up doing 6K that day. But, like the not having the schedule to be on has been a lot of fun. There have been some swims where I'm just like, oh wow, this is great. There have also been the swims when I show up and I'm like, I don't know, it's pandemic world. Oh crap. Well, 2K is what I've got today. I'm giving up. Outside life is just too much for me right now. That cleared my head, but I don't have anything more to give to this.
Yeah.
So maybe the biggest lesson is just in letting go and being wherever you are in the moment and accepting that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, sure. I'll have that one down by the time this is over.
Advice for aspiring marathon swimmers, aspiring reluctant marathon swimmers like yourself. What would you tell them?
I thought when I signed up for Big Shoulders 5K, I was like, oh my God, that's more than I've ever swum in a pool workout. And there's not a wall there. Like, and it's funny because I did it so easily, but it was this big jump, the longest open water swims I'd ever done. I'd done a 2 mile. We had a 2 mile open water in our local lakes, but that one had seemed long when I had done it. So I was like, oh, a 5K. Oh my God, this is just so long. But it was amazing how quickly I sort of did it. And I mean, I trained more for it. I was really concerned that I wouldn't be able to do it. So I guess the advice is just take that first leap, whatever it is that seems out of reach, develop a plan and put that little voice in your head that says this is too much, out of your mind, and then be willing to get in and try it, and maybe it is too much. No, it turns out that I didn't quite know what all the elements of this were. Like that's okay. You get a lot of information with each of these things that you try, and there's feedback on, like you can plan for the components that you know about. Oh, I need to be swimming lots of distance. But if all your distance swimming is in a pool and you're moving to open water, there are going to be things that are different, even if you've tried to account for that.
Mm-hmm.
But you just do it. I guess the reluctance part, yeah, I tend to be like, longest swim I've done right now is 12 miles. Obviously I should be hopping to 15. It would be crazy to jump to 22. And yet, taking my own advice, maybe that will be, maybe if the pieces that fall into place, if the next one's a 20 plus, maybe I will jump up there. But I'm sure that that is not what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to take off the next little chunk, the next step in the ladder that gets you a little closer to that.
Right. What marathon swimmers inspired you?
Oh my gosh. So I am Indianapolis based. So I have a bunch of locals that I still think if I'd been out on my own somewhere, I'm not sure I would have jumped into this world. There were a bunch of people who do this. So I think, Steve Rao is a teammate and has always been really helpful and just super approachable. Like as soon as I started doing this, he'll come and talk to me, and he's more than willing to share whatever he knows. Mark obviously was my go-to because I knew that he was the one who knew about this. Jan Johnson is an indie swimmer. She was sort of one of the first, I think, even before Mark started swimming the long stuff. She did the sound, not the New York Sound, the one that's in Maryland, I believe. But she did a lot of the really, really long stuff, and I think she did the Bridges to Bluffs 10K this past year and said, okay, I'm done with marathon swimming. She's in her 60s, maybe. Yeah, I think she's in her 60s. And I think she's kind of like, yeah, I've done that. But she is just so helpful and so nice. And just the example of somebody who is a middle of the road swimmer. Like you don't have to have been the upper echelon of age group or masters or college swimming to get into this and do some amazing things. And she seems like such a normal person, if you don't know. And I was like, what? Jan's swimming like 20 miles? What? And that was 10 years ago, and she sort of planted the seed. And then I absolutely adore Jessica Kiris, and whenever, like the cold water adaptation blog that she wrote just the other day, I'm like, oh, this is so great, because I love digging into the literature and trying to figure things out and then plan what I'm going to do. And I think I see a little bit of a kindred soul when I read Jess's stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And I also think that she always seems to be really open to questions, and here's my research, here's my experience, your results may vary. And I'm like, yep, that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, I called her once, and she was looking for a lake to swim somewhere near her. She's like, hold on, let me check my logs. And she goes back into her logbooks and finds out a temperature on a specific day at a specific lake. And she's very
oh my god
organized. She refuses to be a guest, but I'll keep trying. All right, you guys, that brings us up way past the end of time, but
Oh
it's
my
always
gosh.
fun to,
Okay.
it's my fault.
Yeah.
I love hearing you guys' stories. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a
And we'll,
lot. Sorry to
yeah,
go over.
you should, like I said, it's my fault. I could have wrapped it up sooner, but I want to hear your story.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Diane.
All right, you guys have a great day. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks,
Bye.
Shannon. Bye.